the book called Tomer Devorah. And Tomer Devorah was written by somebody named Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who was one of the sages of Tzfat in the Middle Ages, around the time of the Arizal and of Yosef Karo and the like. And he wrote this book, which is basically a Kabbalistic Musar book. It's using some of the ideas of Kabbalah and then translating them into practical, improving our practical kind of daily living. So it's an interesting marriage of both of these ideas of Kabbalah and Musar. We're in, the first part of the book is dedicated to the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim, and we finished that not too long ago. The second part of the book is dealing with the 10 Spheros, and we've just started that maybe we did one or two sessions. Actually, I think the last time we met was the first one, right? Yeah. So then, the first of the Spheros is Keter, and now for the benefit of everybody in the class, the rest of the book is going to be going through the different Spheros, the 10 Spheros, starting from Keter, showing a little bit about the deeper idea of the Sphira, and then trying to present how we can translate that into improving our daily living. And he elaborates most thoroughly on the Sphira of Keter more than the others. So this whole second chapter is longer than the rest of the chapters. And there are, he lists here, at least initially, 8 different ways in which a person can emulate the attribute of Keter. And then he goes on for a little more before starting the third chapter, which is going to be talking about Chokhmah. So we've done the first. And remember, the first is that Keter is anava, which is humility, as distinguished from yira, something that a person, for example, who has fear or awe of someone else might recognize the greatness of that object of his awe, but he still has a sense of self. My self-perception is that of being much lower than my perception of the one who I fear. So the person might humble himself before his object of awe, but it's still coming from a realization of self. Anava is something which is higher than that. Anava is not coming from an awareness of self. On the contrary, it's coming through a negation of self. And therefore, that's Keter. Keter is not just a humility that comes about through Keter's, as it were, awareness of its being much lower than God, but it's absolute negation before God, so that it becomes a conduit, a hollow conduit through which the influence from Ein Sof and the divine comes down through Keter into the rest of the Spheros. And he's saying, and the point was that we should act as much as possible in this way as well. Through a negation, whereby we, through humility, are willing to share what we have, what we're given by God, to others, and to not distinguish or discriminate in any way. This is the humility of Keter. That brings us up now to, that was just by review of the first. Now we're up to the second. Were you going to say something, Chaim?
Keter is the highest. That's the crown. That's
right.
The highest Spheros. Yeah.
Right. Maybe you're getting at a dichotomy which we elaborated on last time, which is that despite the elevation of Keter, it nevertheless has this degree of humility, and it's really more than that. It's not so much despite, but actually because of the humility, it is elevated above all other spheros, and that's the point. That something which has a sense of yesh, and we connected that to the next sphere of chokhmah. Remember, we based all of this on verses. Chokhmah, me'ayin basav, and many different other ekev anava yira, different verses that we discussed last time. But in any case, it's actually not so much despite, but because of anava that it's elevated to such a high level. It's the very bittul of yesh which enables something to get closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu and therefore ultimately higher. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, right? It's not despite his greatness he was Anav Mikol Adam, but because he was Anav Mikol Adam, that enabled him to attain that greatness. Why? Because he didn't have a sense of self before God. He was hollowed of self, and therefore became closer to God than anybody else. So it's because of the negation of self that one is elevated. Keter is the highest, yet the lowest, as it were. Because of its being the lowest, it is the highest. So that brings up to the second. The second midah, or the second detail of Keter, which we can emulate. Machshavto tidme lemachsheves a Keter. A person's thought processes, his way of thinking, should emulate, should parallel that of Keter. Now, as in the previous section here too as well, which may be speaking of Keter anthropomorphologically, attributing to it thought processes or attributes, and that's not the case. It's just for the purpose of illustrating the point. The quality. How is it that Keter works? So, machshavto tidme lemachshavas Keter. A person's way of thinking should be similar to that of Keter. Kmo she'oisa hachma lo tifsok tomid lachshav machshavas tovos. So, just like that degree of intelligence, and he's not referring here to the sphere of Chokhmah, he's referring to Keter. I don't know why he calls it, I'm not sure why he calls it Chokhmah, but he's talking about the thought process or the influence of Keter into the midah of Chokhmah. That will never stop. Lo tifsok tamid. It happens eternally. Lachshav machshavas tovos. To think good thoughts. Of course, right? Keter is not thinking good thoughts, but the point is Keter is constantly good. It's constantly sharing good influence. The hara lo yikanes ba, and evil will not go into Keter. Why? B'pnei shehi rachamim gemurim, because Keter is the sphere of complete mercy. And remember, in the earlier part of the book, we were talking about how the Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim actually originate in Keter. So that Keter is entirely Rachamim. And there we discussed only superficially, now maybe it's an opportunity to go into a little more depth, how on the one hand, everything comes through Keter, all of creation is directed with divine energy through Keter, projected or refracted into the spheros, including, for example, the spheros to the left, which we described would include spheros of din and judgment. And the question is, how is it that the din, judgment, comes about through the Keter, through the sphere of Keter, which is kula rachamim, kula chesed? How does it come about?
Because it is hesed.
How so?
Well, because first of all, if the creator of the world is involved in somebody's life, that is already hesed, because the creator of the world wants that person to improve. And maybe also when that person receives a certain din and he's able to recognize it and grow from it, that is the elevation of himself to a higher level, and
excellent.
That's
Beautiful.
That's
beautiful. Yeah, very
that can
nice.
improve the person, so it's not a negative, it's a positive.
Yeah, very good. I like that very much. So it would seem then in Keter, you don't really have din. In Keter, you don't have din. You have rachamim. But when that aspect or that component of rachamim in Keter is kind of translated or projected down into lower realms of creation, it takes on the form of what we perceive as din, judgment, which superficially one might view as being negative. But Chaim's explaining that that's not at all. It's actually coming from rachamim gemurim. And the purpose is, for like two examples that Chaim gave, if a person transgresses, and we discussed this a bit in the past as well, then the midas of din actually lets the person know that he has transgressed. And this is God's way of bringing himself into a person's life in order to help correct the person. Like it says, Es asher Hashem av yochiach. He who God loves, he will rebuke. So in that case, the din in a person's life is actually an expression of God's love. I think that's the first point you made. And the second point is it helps a person improve and grow. So that even though we perceive it as din, in truth, it's really rachamim. And in Keter, that's exactly how it is. It's rachamim gemurim. So, and evil can't go in there at all. Mipnei shehu rachamim gemurim. Ve'en sham din v'lo shum koshi cloud. There's no judgment, nor are there any difficulties or tensions. Kacha adam tomid tihye machshavto penuya mikol davar mechuar. Therefore, a person who wants to emulate this aspect of the sphere of Keter should be very careful that no evil thought, no negative thought, no thought of judgment comes into his mind at all. Kamoshi sod chokhmah Torah keduma. Such is the mystery of the ancient wisdom of Torah, meaning referring to the quintessential wisdom of Torah as expression of divine intelligence before the Torah itself undergoes a tzimtzum, because the Torah itself also goes through a tzimtzum, goes through this type of refraction. So that the Torah talks about, for example, impure things, unholiness, transgressions, punishments, right, and all of these things. But all of that is really also a type of tzimtzum from the primordial, that's what I was looking for, the primordial wisdom of the Torah. So a person should try and enable his mind to get back to and to maintain as pure a state as possible. V'lo yechsar sham soid Torah, and there should not be lacking anywhere in his mind, in his intelligence, this mystery of the primordial aspect of the wisdom of the Torah, which is the wisdom of God. Like it says, Kud shabrichu v'raisa chadhu. God and the Torah are one. God and the Torah are inextricably bound with one another as one. How can that be? God defies definition, yet the Torah is full of definitions. The point is, it's referring to, right, God and the wisdom which is at the basis of the Torah before that Torah undergoes a tzimtzum as it's translated into this worldly description or concept. So a person's mind should try and connect into the essence of the wisdom of Torah as much as possible. Yeah?
So when we understand the Shaklavatariya or the workings of what the rabbis are discussing, that is the connection that we're getting into the stream of the wisdom of Torah, meaning that if one can bathe himself in that kind of process, I guess, or I don't know, not just logic, but just in that essence, that's tapping into the wisdom of Torah.
I think so, but even more, and I think that would maybe be the initial elevation, and there would be a step which would be even above that as well. I don't know how and who can attain that, but you're right that if a person's becomes immersed in that stream of that flow of thought of the Shakalatari and all of the different sugyas throughout Shas and all of the different ideas in Torah, then at some point the confluence of all of those streams of thought would take one into the Yam, yes, the sea of Torah,
right?
And that would be kind of perhaps what we're talking about. This kind of transcendental wisdom of Torah, which is a confluence of all of those different kind of aspects of I like the way you put that, kind of like immersing yourself in the stream of thought of Torah, the Shakalatariya, it flows. Yeah? Like it says, like Kolin Necholim, all the streams, they flow to the sea. So Torah, of course, is compared to water, and every sugya is its own type of rivulet, and every tractate is its own river. But eventually they all flow into the Yam. The Yam is an Indian of Chokhmah. It's Gematria 50. Yam, 10 and 40. It's 50. Yam is 50. The Sharei, the Chamishim Sharei Bina, the 50 gates of understanding. So that's the Yam Shel Talmud. And the person immerses himself in all these different rivulets and rivers. Eventually, he's going to get into the Yam. That's the Nun. That's the Sharei Bina. And I think that's perhaps what he's referring to here. Kach lo yifnei el shum paniya, and therefore a person should not have his mind distracted with any distraction which would take him away from machshavas Torah, the thoughts of Torah. It's like they say about the Vilna Gaon, when he became, in his old age, he no longer learned Midrash, he no longer learned Gemara, he no longer learned Mishnah, he only learned Chumash. And people mistakenly think that that means that as he was getting older, his mind was not able to learn the more intricate kind of expressions of Torah, so chas v'shalom, because it was like learning Chumash, but partially it was unpunishment. The pshat is, after an entire life of Yigiyas Torah, and in the entire, we call it Torah Kula, the entire Torah, and Nigla and Nistar, yeah, there was no longer a need to learn any of that because it was all commentary. When he read the Torah Kedosha, he saw all of that in the words of the Torah itself. Every Darshas Chazal, everything in the Nigla, and everything in Nistar, and every halacha, it was all in the Torah.
You could see the Nikadot in the way they were in the Trop, and that's the holiest.
The Nikadot, and the Trop, and the Oisios, and the Diyukim, and the Yiturim, and the Chisurim. All of the drushes that the entire Talmud is based on, right, which is darshaning out the psukim, right. This yud, inside that yud, he was thinking reams and reams of Torah that discusses what that yud is, what it's marbe, what it's mamit, and so forth and so on. So that's what we're talking about, connecting to the chokhmas of Torah in a way that everything all flows into one cohesive whole. And therefore a person should, just like Keter, is a place of rachamim gemurim, and it's a place of the ratzon and boris barach, and the Torah Kedosha, without any impurity, pure and unadulterated. So a person should have his mind as free as possible from anything that would distract him from this as well. V'lachshov b'gedulas akel, and he should be thinking about the greatness of God, upe'ulasav hatoivos, and his good deeds. B'gedulas akel, the greatness of God, the name there, kel is also rachamim. Elokim is a name which denotes judgment. But kel, alone, is referring to God's power to do good. Like we saw, Mikel Kamocha. Remember the first of the Yigim Midas Rachamim? Mikel Kamocha. Who is powerful like you, God, to show mercy. So God has the power to be merciful. The name Michael comes from that, right? Michael. Who is mi means who. Ke is as kel, powerful like you, God. Michael, which is Michael, of course, is the kind of what? Yeah, yes, the prototypical malach of Chesed and Rachamim. Michael. That's why it says here, the person should be thinking, therefore, of Gedula Sakel. Gedula is also Chesed. Gedula is Yeminacha, the greatness of your right hand, where the right hand is Chesed. So, Gedula Sakel, the strength of God's mercy, and that fits in with what he continues and says, Upulos avatovos, and the deeds that he does, which we perceive as good. Of course, as Chaim explained earlier, even things that we don't perceive as good are really good. But certainly the things that we perceive as good are good. And they all come from Gedulas Akel. And therefore a person should think about these aspects of God, and therefore Lehetiv, himself, do as good as possible, V'chiyotze, not hold back and withhold goodness from other people. This would fit in, I think, what we learned in a previous Midah, that even if a person is undeserving of our kindness, even if a person, more than that, not only is undeserving of it, but has harmed us, embarrassed us, or caused us anguish in some way or the other, we should still, if we want to act in the ways of Hashem, be willing to be meitiv, to do good, and show chesed, and be benevolent to people, like he's saying here, even though they've harmed us, even though they've offended us. because that's what Hashem does through the midah of Keter. Klal shel davar, the general rule of thumb here is lo yikones zar uvotel machshavto. A person should not allow a foreign influence to come into his mind and nullify those thoughts of Torah, those thoughts of contemplating the greatness of God. That would be like bringing some source of impurity into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, where that place has to be preserved as much as possible with purity. A person's mind is like the Holy of Holies, and if you were to bring in there something impure, so he's contaminating his own Holy of Holies. This is a very difficult level because, certainly we come from a background with many different opportunities. Some of them more positive, others less positive. Even if they're not presented us as opportunities, they might often be imposed upon us by our environment, things that you hear, things that you see, things that you're exposed to, people that you come in contact with. So it would become very difficult to maintain purity of mind and purity of heart when you have all of these options to choose from, and sometimes we choose harmful options, and of course, like I said, there are influences which we don't choose at all, but they're imposed upon us. But it takes tremendous strength, tremendous fortitude, self-control, and it's not, of course, easy at all to maintain. That's why, for example, of all of the Avos, Yosef was called Tzaddik. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were basically kind of operating in an insular environment. But Yosef, as a young man, was already... he was already plunged into the flesh pots of Egypt. And he had to maintain his purity there despite all odds. If a person's able, despite all of that influence, to maintain purity, that would bring a person to the level of being a tzaddik. What Joseph did. We don't find others were called that, specifically Yosef. So a person who has been in the ivory towers of Or Sameach and has been turned on after a few years of learning, but has for different reasons decided or have had to go back to the flesh pots of Egypt. Go back to America and do whatever he has to do there. Such a person is like a spiritual Jedi. He's a warrior of light, and is bringing the teachings of Torah into the things that he does there, and also has to fend off all types of forces of the dark side, which none of us here in the ivory towers of the light of the what do they call it, the light tower? The Or Sameach. We don't have to deal with that as much. But somebody who's able to do that, and go back and be a spiritual ninja like that, and still maintain his observance and his commitment and his Torah study and his prayer, right? So such a person is holding on a very high level, right? Person can be in the walls of the yeshiva 24/7, shuckling and this and the whole thing, and a visitor from the outside might say, "Wow, these guys are real tzaddikim." He doesn't realize what a tzaddik he is. Because it's one thing to be like they are when they've been in the yeshiva the past few years, but to come back as he is, having been away for all that time, right? In my opinion, that person's a tzaddik, and it should be in his own eyes as well. So this is the point here. To try as much as possible to maintain and preserve the purity of one's sanctuary. That's his mind. His brain being that ark in which are the thoughts of the Torah. That's the Holy of Holies. And this was the degree of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his group of disciples. Yes, that they maintained a very high level of Torah learning and of purity. Urei shehefrid Rabbi Yossi machshavto ma'at kama hochicho Rabbi Shimon b'Zohar b'Parashas V'Yakel. And when one of his disciples, that of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of his disciples, Rabbi Yossi, his mind was distracted just for a fleeting moment from Torah. His rabbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, rebuked him tremendously as a result of that. Think about maybe a security offense or something. You've got like an electrical wire, going around like this. And it's all connected to some central kind of, I don't know. What shall we call it?
Sure.
Yeah, some central focal point. Yeah. So if somebody trips one of the wires anywhere in the parameter, right? So that's immediately detected by the focal point, which kind of connects all of that. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was like the Rebbe and had around him all these different disciples, and they would learn together. And if anybody's mind was breached, if that kind of security fence was breached by some foreign thought, he immediately was able to detect that there was some breach in the matrix. Rabbi Yossi, what are you thinking? Yeah. That's what they were like, so intertuned. They were so like tuned into one another, and their learning was so interconnected that they could literally feel fluctuation in the learning because of a person's kind of ups or downs in their learning. So Rabbi Shimon rebuked him and said, "There's been an intruder over there. Get the system back up." So this would be the second way of emulating the Keter then, that a person's thoughts should be positive, should be full of rachamim, and should be connected as much as possible to the purity of Torah, which is no easy task, an easy task at all. Yeah, if a person has to take time off, and nowadays, generally speaking, we all have to take time off in ways which are quantitatively and qualitatively different, one person from the other, each person according to his need. But a person should be honest about what that need really is, and not go beyond that. Sometimes you need to sleep in. Sometimes you need to eat a little more. Sometimes a person needs to maybe read a book, which is maybe not let's say a Torah type of a book, a novel or something. The person has to try and minimize as much as possible how far he goes and for how long, meaning qualitatively and quantitatively way, because all of this, in the end of the day, is bringing in impurity, impurity, or at least compromising the purity of what he's gained. And so if he's going to take a step back, he should be careful that it's really just one step in order to be able to take 2 or 3 steps forward again. But if he's going to take 1 step forward and then 3 steps back, another step forward and then 2 steps back, so he's like, you're never going to get anywhere. So therefore, a person has to be very careful and weigh these considerations properly. All right, let's stop here today.